Welcome back to the Schmitter's 100 Acre Woods. Out here today at the sawmill. So today, hoping to get to this red oak. So we loaded this on the mill a little while ago. Thought we were going to get to it and just never did. I think the last thing we did on the mill was make those stickers. So it's been a little while since we've been out here, but show you we have a decent sized red oak here. We'll grab a measure and see what the size is. You can see that bottom's starting to split out, so I'll have part of it there that's not going to be very useful. But the idea is we're going to try to quarter saw this. So that's what the lines on here, you can kind of see those are. So just trying to figure kind of how we can cut this without having to do quite so much cutting from the bottom and then having to move the piece to the side, take that piece off, and so on. I'm trying to figure out kind of a better method for that. So that's going to be part of what we do for this one, is just try to figure that out. Red oak's supposed to be one of those ones that whenever you quarter saw it, you get a lot of the fleck in it. So thought it'd be a good one to try. And sycamore is supposed to be another one that is a lot more stable whenever you quarter saw it. So we have a lot of sycamore at the 100 acres that we want to try to utilize. So we're gonna try cutting up a sycamore at some point, just kind of normal, and then try quarter sawing it and see the differences and kind of what we like. The disadvantage with quarter saw is you end up with a lot of different varying sizes as you go through that log. But if it makes it more usable wood, then, you know, that's something that way out the way. So, if we go this direction, I'm at about 24, and then this way, kind of spread out a little bit more because of that split, but about 26. So, decent size. The red oak's pretty heavy. So we're probably going to try to use the tractor to turn it instead of us, and just see how that goes. I did get that claw that we're going to use to load the log trailer, and I think in some circumstances it would work fairly well for that, but we're really hoping the claw will work well here to where you can kind of pick up and you're not trying to get the forks under. Definitely, since we don't have 100% level ground, you can use that claw to pick up. So we're going to try that, and then we also may try to use it to rotate. So basically, instead of putting the claw at the top, over top and just picking up, kind of put it on the side, and then whenever you pick up, it'll want to rotate that around. So we're going to try that today as well. So here in a bit, we'll hopefully get this fired up and let it run for a bit. Like I said, it's been a little while, so get everything moving and then try the quarter saw this. So our first goal with this is mainly to get it cut down to pieces that we can actually handle. So while, you know, this is a fair sized log, it being red oak just really, you know, makes it much more challenging. If this were a poplar or even a sycamore, there's just not as dense wood, whereas this is very dense. So you know, moving it around just is more challenging. So we kind of get it into smaller pieces is kind of our primary thing, but still be able to get, you know, quarter sawn pieces out of this. And with the quarter saw, there's not a really good way around, with our mill anyway, having to take pieces off and put them back on the mill. So while we could maybe do this a little bit more efficiently, with our mill, and since we have to manually turn everything, you know, it becomes where, you know, we try to cut it into smaller pieces so that we can move it on and off the mill. So we have this chunk here, and bring the tractor up, and we slide that piece onto the forks to you know, bring it back on the mill later. so that so we can then quarter saw it properly. Just trying to get the forks positioned here in such a way that it's easy to move that piece. Like I said, these are really heavy pieces, so the less we have to actually pick them up, you know, the better it is. I don't remember exactly where this one came from or what its you know, kind of origin is. We had some pretty big ones that we took down at the 100 acres, but also at Pendle Farms whenever we were helping clean up there. There was some decent sized red oak there that got taken down in a storm too, so I don't remember where this one exactly came from, but it's a nice log. It has a little bit of a split in the end, so we kind of have a little bit to contest with there that you know, we'll work around as we mill, or we just mill and then we kind of cut off at the end. So I try to show here kind of why we quarter saw, because even on this first cut, you get some nice you know, ray fleck in it. And just kind of showing here, you know, so basically you want to cut 90 degrees to the grain. So, you know, if the curves are kind of going around on the right hand side there, you want to cut at 90 degrees to that, and not in line with it or parallel to it, so that you kind of end up with this, you know, you're supposed to get prettier boards, make straighter boards when they dry, and they're not supposed to twist as much. So here again, just kind of showing, that's the chunk that we took off, and basically we'll flip this up on its end and want to cut that direction, which will be 90 degrees to the grain, and try to expose some of that that fleck that's in it, which I think after, I don't remember if it's this one or the next one, you really can see that after we start cutting. So again, just moving chunks off, trying to kind of see, you know, this is, since it's not something that we've really done before, we've done like once before, just trying to kind of think through and look at the log really to see, okay, if we take this piece off, we'll be able to cut 90 degrees. And then again, with this being, you know, heavy, see if it's something to where, like, you know, we can, you know, cut 6 inches off, and then be able to have maybe some 6-inch boards out of, you know, a certain size, 4-inch board, something like that. So between having to move stuff off, you end up with a lot more labor. But here, this is kind of finally getting into that, so you can see all the kind of specs in it and everything. So you know, I feel like a red oak, really desired thing, looks really nice. You know, you put some stain or some finish on that, and it really brings that out, and it just makes it look really really nice. So we've gotten about half this cut up, or maybe a little bit more, so we go ahead and work on rotating this, and kind of working on getting some quarters out of it. So, you know, that the whole quarter saw thing is, you know, in a perfect situation, you cut it into 4 segments, and then kind of, you know, work those. With the smaller log, we may be able to do that. We also have a capacity with ours on how far down you can go, which I'll show, I think on the next cut, kind of what that looks like and why we can't do that on some of the bigger logs. But here, just making sure that we're up against the backstop squarely. So every now and then you'll have, like, whenever you rotate that around, have a chunk of wood stuck there that won't let you be square. So while it's not a huge deal, we try to make sure it's as square as possible to the bed, just so that, you know, we end up with those better lumber from it that's you know, as square as possible. Okay, so on this cut here, whenever I crouch down a little bit, you can see, so basically we have about 10 inches, I think it is, from where the blade goes through to that corner right there. So it gets pretty close just because of how that kind of angles, but wasn't too bad on this one. I think we have another cut that's even closer, but just working on getting these chunked off and put back on the forks to then kind of go through and cut them again. So that is where you know, maybe a hydraulic mill that can turn the log for you. There's a video out there that someone's done where basically you kind of make a octagon or some kind of, you know, shape like that, to where basically you kind of keep cutting around in a circle to kind of get that that quarter sawn effect. And just with hours and having to manually do everything, you know, you kind of have to come up with other ways of doing it, which does just take a lot more time. But we finally got down to a piece that was pretty good. There's some knots in it and everything, so I think this is about the last one we do. So one thing we did kind of happen on this one is down at the bottom there were knots. Whenever you get close to those knots, it's going to want to cause the blade to dive. So it was partially a dull blade, partially hitting those knots, and the red oak is something we've always had issues with, so we end up with some waviness in these, some of these pieces. And between having the smaller blade and the dull blade, it just you know, one of those things that you can't always avoid the knots and everything. So basically what happened was we're going through, hit a knot, it dove, and it happened to dive or right at the end of the piece, and it dove down into and just grazed one of the little tabs that sticks up to hold the wood. So it didn't destroy the blade. I mean, it definitely didn't help it, but it just grazed the top. I mean, I didn't cut into the metal, but just kind of grazed the top of it. So later on here, I kind of show that wavy board. I don't know how well it shows up on camera, and it may be a later one that I'll go more into, but that is one thing that, you know, we thought we had a pretty good blade on here, and then ended up switching to we can run an 1.5 inch and a 0.045, I believe it is, on this mill, so we can run a little bit bigger blades on the LX150. And we find for cutting stuff like this, it really helps having that blade that just doesn't want to deviate quite as much in this hardwood. So, and that's one thing we always have to look at and see which way the degree is, if you want a 4 or 10. It's just something we haven't committed to memory yet as far as which one's better for hardwood versus softwood. So it's just something we look up, and we have a pretty good collection of different blades. Just kind of as they had them on sale, we wanted to have a pretty good supply of them as we kind of work through stuff. And then we have a local person that does sharpen them that we're going to check out here and see about getting some of our older blades sharpened so we can kind of get them in the rotation. Okay, so I believe it's on this one here. As he's cutting through, he's getting really close, and notice that it does go down. I think he just nicked it there, so I have him stop and kind of go through the... Alright, so we got some boards quarter sawn here and off the mill. So this last one ended up with a big wave in it, and it's right where the knots and stuff are.
and I think just like the boards before it were going fine, didn't have any issues, and then hit that one and just going too fast potentially. And sometimes there's not a whole lot you can do about it, but there's a pretty good cup in a couple of the spots there. So there's like 3 cups, and then the rest of it's okay. So just where it's going through at the top, it had a little bit of issue, but wasn't too bad. And that's why like we tried to, instead of having the full like 24 inches, try to get it down to like 12, something like that, 10, so that you're not bogging down the engine too much. And that sometimes helps, but just didn't do too much for that. So we'll probably end up cutting it off down there at that end and keep like that last, I don't know, 3 feet or so, and then the cups start. So it'd be a lot of work to really get much out of that. The other ones aren't too bad and have that same kind of fleck in it, so so far pretty good. And then we still have these. So we still have these here to put on, and we still need to do some cutting to make sure that whenever we go through a mill, you're cutting it perpendicular. So that's kind of the thing that defines quarter saw, is all of your cuts are perpendicular to the growth rings. So like if your rings are kind of going this way, you want to cut perpendicular 90 degrees to it. So like this one here, for example, whenever you start to get out this way, you start kind of cutting in line with it. So if you cut it somewhere in here, you can kind of cut it, and then we can go back and start cutting it this way. So while this produces supposedly nicer boards and they dry straighter and everything, it's obviously a lot more work. I mean, this is a big tree and you don't get as many boards from it. Just because, and you end up with varying sizes. Like if we do this and cut, you know, some this way, you're gonna end up with a varying step of, you know, a board that's maybe 4 inches, and then 3, 2, and then maybe a 1-inch board. So, you know, you end up with varying sizes. And like the bottom one, we're gonna cut probably about in half, and see if we can't get some more like boards that are about the same size. So you have maybe like a 8 or 6 inch board, we can get several out of it. And then same thing with this one over here, cut it and figure out how we want to cut it up, so we can kind of maximize the boards. And once we do all of that, we'll probably then go back and put stuff on the mill, 1 or 2 at a time, and get rid of the bark so that we have square boards to work with. Because that's the other thing you have here, is you can't really work off of a square side the same you can that you normally would, because you know, you need to be taking stuff off the top, so then you're always kind of working against one of the curves instead of being able to just mill down the log. So one of those work in progress. We'll figure out if there's a better way to do it. You know, a lot of it, if you had a, you know, a 70, an LT70 or something like that, where it was rotating the log for you, and you could sit there and you just play with the hydraulics to get it to roll it around, it may not be as big a deal. But like these, you know, we had to bring the tractor up to get them off, and then it hasn't been too bad to roll it around, but it's still a fair amount of work to do all that by hand. So slowly figuring it out and seeing what the best option is.
Okay, so next day here, work on getting the rest of that milled up. So we found that we didn't end up with too much waste. Now we didn't go through and get rid of all the bark or the live edge on the edge. During this stage, we figure whenever we use it, we'll go ahead and like use the table saw and do that. So in theory, we'd have more waste if we were to do that piece of it. But the other kind of thing you have to think about whenever quarter sawing is, if you look at that piece of wood, you always end up with kind of steps. So, you know, we have a couple there that, you know, you'll have like a consistent 4-inch piece down, but like these here, because of how, you know, you have the radius, you end up with, you know, some maybe 2-inch pieces, and then work your way up to maybe like a 4 or 6-inch piece, depending on how big you cut it. So once we get to this stage, things start going a little bit quicker, just figuring out which way we want, and just again looking at the grain to make sure we're kind of cutting it so it's at that 90-degree angle. I think anything from like 45 to 90 is considered quarter sawn, so you can see how, you know, you have that curvature there at the top, and we're kind of cutting as close to that as possible. So that's why we also, you know, cut them where we did, so that whenever we go through and do this step, you still have that quarter sawn effect. So that's where it's nice. We did all these as 1-inch pieces, so able to kind of get the mill set, and you can see all that then opens up that you don't necessarily always see whenever you just, you know, straight cut it. You know, you'll have some of that just from, you know, you'll have some 90-degree, but almost every piece we have with this, it really shows that that flecking in it. So that's one thing you have to watch. So red oak is really bad about leaving those black marks whenever it's left in contact with iron for a bit, so we ended up having to leave these on the forks until the next day, and in that time frame had that issue. Now it's something that will plane out and isn't a big deal. You know, it doesn't get too deep into the wood, it's just a superficial kind of thing, but if you do leave it in contact with metal, that will happen. There, we're just starting to touch the edge, pretty close to that 10 inches, so we do have some limitation when it comes to that as far as how big of a piece we can cut up and down. So instead of trying to carry that over, just bring it over to the forks and then can kind of get it pushed off. So again, it's one of those we want to get down to a more manageable size, and you kind of have ours ended up being about a 4x4 in the center. That's the heart of the wood that we didn't end up using for this kind of quarter sawn you know, project that we're doing. So you end up with, you know, a pretty good chunk in the center that isn't going to be considered you know, good wood or, you know, be quarter sawn. So that's why we took the chunk off the top, and then have this middle piece we'll take out and then start sawing again. So this is one we got back on the mill, and then just kind of do a time lapse here of getting those milled up, and it is nice where you kind of end up with some consistent sized pieces here. Just so whenever you do a project, you know, you kind of have that consistency. So that piece we moved back was kind of the 4x4 I was talking about. That's the center of the wood. And then, so here we're just kind of looking at the end of the wood, putting like a Sharpie mark on it so you kind of know where to cut. Get you know, in the ballpark so we can move that off. And then kind of go through, look, and I think, you know, we can do a small rotation there so that we have the wood better held. We wouldn't have to do that. I mean, we're cutting it the same way either way, but this way you actually have the wood up against stops, and we can use the small little clamps to really hold the wood better so it doesn't shift while cutting. So at the bottom, get a little timid after that other one happened where we dove and had some issues. So some of the bottom pieces, instead of going that inch, we went like inch and a half on some of those. Just being a little bit more timid on you know, running the blade into those stops. So something that, you know, hadn't happened yet. It's the first time we've had that, so just another one of those things to kind of watch out for and be cognizant of. They have all this nice wood. We end up stacking it in the carport, kind of where we had the cherry at. And we have a pretty decent collection of it here, various sizes. So we have about 1 inch on most of this stuff. So we go ahead and, like I said, store it behind the vehicles in the carport. We had cherry stacked there before and got it all used, so we'll be able to get it stacked up so it can start drying. So hit that thumbs up button, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.